1800s, Nottingham was a rapidly growing town. The Industrial Revolution meant that there was more work and bigger opportunities available in Nottingham. This, however, had a big impact on the limited water supply in the area. Before Papplewick pumping station was built, the water was originally taken from the River Trent and the River Leen. This water was highly polluted as the rivers ran through heavily populated areas. People dumped their waste into the River Trent and Leen, causing diseases like cholera to break out. Cholera was a deadly menace right into the middle of the 19th century, but it wasn't until the 1850s that it was linked with stagnant, polluted water supplies. Pumping stations like Papplewick helped to change these conditions by making clean, naturally filtered water available. A reservoir was built here in 1879 and the pumping station was opened in 1884. Thus, Britain went from being a country reliant on patchy, polluted and dangerous water into one where the ever-expanding population enjoyed regular, plentiful and healthy supplies. Papplewick pumping station was part of a network of local pumping stations and reservoirs and played a major role in supplying water to the booming town of Nottingham, which was granted city status by Queen Victoria in 1897. Nottingham's population grew by 500% during the 19th century, and with an increase in the amount of sewage, it meant that there was widespread disease. So, the people of Nottingham were in desperate need of fresh water, and it required detailed planning and astonishing engineering. Even today we can see what the result of this was. One of the last working steam-driven pumping stations in Britain and a magnificent example of fine Victorian architecture. Papplewick Pumping Station. The pumping station was built during the early 1880s. The person who built it and came up with the design was Thomas Hawksley, a local-born engineer. Him and Marriott Ogle Tarbottom, who supervised the project, worked closely together to have it ready and opened in 1884. Why is this station located on this particular spot? The answer lies beneath the ground with an enormous rock formation called the Bunter Sandstone. This sediment rock is over 200 million years old and covers a large proportion of the country. Papplewick pumping station was built on top of this rock. This demonstrates how carefully the engineering of the project was thought through. This rock acts like a giant bath sponge. 20% of it is made up of holes into which rainwater trickles and is stored. When water is removed, for example from a well, sunk into the stone, then more water percolates down to replace it. Not only this, but as the water trickles through the stone, most of its impurities are removed. This is why Papplewick pumping station and its well were built here, and even though Papplewick is classified as a scheduled ancient monument, the site is still operational and continues to supply water to the people of Nottingham. The pumping station lifted this pure groundwater to the surface, then pumped it uphill to a storage reservoir. From there the water was fed into the public water supply by gravity. As there was such a massive demand for fresh water in the city, Tarbottom had to find an efficient and reliable engine to power the project. He decided to go for 6 coal-fired boilers, which were 29 foot in length and had 32 cross tubes within each boiler casing to improve the heat output. This coal was mined at Limby Colliery. They are situated in the boiler house, which you see on your left when approaching the building. Only 3 of these boilers had to work at one time to power the engines, and it was so made that any of the pumps could easily be connected into the system in case there was a failure of one. Boilers number 1 and 6 were fitted in 1881 to power the Davy differential engine that sunk the pilot well, which was used for 6 months to check whether there was sufficient water in the reservoir. The other 4 boilers were then fitted in 1883. The steam from the boilers made its way to the engine house and into the 2 engines situated there. These were built by James Watt & Co. and were some of the finest engines ever made. The steam entered the engine cylinders, which were covered in finely polished mahogany, and forced the pistons to move up and down. Each motion caused an iron beam to which each piston is attached to rock. This beam rocks at an even pace because of the large 24-ton flywheels that are on either side of the engine house. When the engine is working, the governors, which are devices that control the speed of the iron beam, spin around, and the centrifugal force they exert is ingeniously used to control the incoming steam and keep the speed constant. This engine can provide up to 1.5 million gallons of water per day. This is equivalent to 60,000 baths, or enough water to take a bath every day for 164 years. The engines lasted 85 years, till 1969, 20 years more than expected, and were then replaced by electrical pumps. When looking over the rail into the basement, we can see the lift pump. The heavy timbers covering the well cut through the bunter sandstone to the water-bearing strata. It is connected by a horizontal tunnel to the original pilot well near the main gate. The function of these steam engines has been superseded by submersible electrical pumps fitted into the pilot well in 1969, which still supplies the Nottingham area with water. Finally, the beautiful cooling pond, situated just in front of the main entrance, is not just there for decoration. It is a functional feature of Papplewick Pumping Station. It only needed to be a large rectangular shape, but it was made into an elegantly curved lake with a central fountain set within a fine ornamental garden. The cold water in the lake acts as a cooler. It made its way into the engine house and condensed the steam used to run the engines. The warm water then ended up back in the pond. The fountain is attached to a separate water supply to top up water levels in the pond. Despite being built far away from any towns or city, Papplewick Pumping Station was created to impress. The exterior has many finely carved stone figures, and also notice the 2-ton terracotta brickwork which this impressive Victorian building is made out of. Also, the architects even went to such lengths as to put the gutters on the inside of the building to ensure the building didn't look unattractive. And the roof slates are made of a fine material which is sourced from Brazil. The main entrance was made to look magnificent, as only VIPs were able to enter the building through it. Also, the interior had columns reminiscent of Egyptian temples. Also, the stained glass windows you will come across are not just for scenery. When the building was built, there were no electrical lights, and the natural light played a big part for workers to be able to check that everything was operating well. The stained glass windows were added because the building costs came in under budget. Therefore, they made the building look nicer and contribute towards lighting up the glorious building. This grand chimney, which is very noticeable, is the exhaust pipe for the boiler house. All the smoke and gases from the intense coal fires in the boilers had to be dispersed somehow. This kind of chimney is known as a detached chimney because it is not built onto the side of the boiler house but connected by an underground flue. It is 120 feet high, that is 36.5 metres, and made of brick with dressed stonework. This whole project took 4 years to build and cost £55,000, which is equivalent to £4.4 million in 2010, and astonishingly enough, the massive building was only operated by 14 people at a given time. These workmen lived close to the pumping station, creating a local community, as Papplewick was miles away from the nearest town. Now Papplewick Pumping Station is only open to the public on certain Sundays of the year. You can come and see the engines in action at certain dates, but you will have to check the website for further details. It is worth coming down to see it and set your minds back to what it was like to work in and live around this brilliant Victorian building in the late 19th and 20th centuries.